everyone, and welcome to the Danikport channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today, we are going to discuss the movie John Wick from 2014. The quiet dignity of a recently widowed man, John Wick, is immediately palpable. We see him, still deep in the rituals of grief, receiving a final heartbreaking gift from his late wife, Helen. A small beagle puppy named Daisy. This small act of remembrance, this tiny spark of connection to the life he was slowly rebuilding, is profoundly important. It's a lifeline tethering him to normalcy after Helen's battle with a terminal illness. John, whose reputation as a legendary, almost mythical figure in the criminal underworld, Baba Yaga, the man you send to kill the bogeyman, is whispered in hushed tones, is trying to live cleanly. He's out. He's done. The sleek, beautiful 1969 Ford Mustang he treasures is the only remaining relic of his past life he hasn't shed. That piece is shattered violently in a gas station parking lot. Three young Russian thugs, utterly oblivious to who they are provoking, decide John's car looks appealing. Iosef Tarasov, the spoiled, arrogant son of Vigo Tarasov, the powerful head of the Russian syndicate in New York, demands the keys. John, trying to remain civil, despite the insult, refuses. The ensuing confrontation leads to Iosef and his crew assaulting John, stealing the Mustang, and, unforgivably, killing Daisy. The death of the dog is not just petty vandalism, it's the systematic destruction of the last piece of Helen's memory he held. It's the trigger. Vigo Tarasov, upon realizing his son has crossed a line so profound he's stolen from John Wick, is filled with an icy dread. He knows exactly who John is. He remembers the impossible jobs John executed for him years ago, when John was still active, mentored by the very rules of the Continental Hotel. John now finds himself constrained by. Vigo attempts to placate John, offering money, apologies, anything to prevent the inevitable reckoning. John, however, refuses negotiation. The debt must be paid in blood. The narrative then shifts into John's meticulous preparation. He retrieves caches of weapons, a carefully curated arsenal hidden beneath the concrete floor of his home. It's a chilling display of an artist returning to his deadly craft. His first move is pragmatic. He needs information on where Iosef is hiding. This leads him to an encounter with Marcus, an old colleague and an exceptional sniper who seems reluctant to betray John, but respects the weight of the situation. John tracks Iosef to a nightclub, the Red Circle, which functions as a front for Vigo's operations. What follows is a ballet of precise, brutal efficiency. John moves through the club, an unstoppable force, leaving a trail of bodies. He's fighting not with wild abandon, but with the honed technique of a master craftsman, utilizing every environment, every object as a potential weapon. Vigo, now truly panicked, puts a massive bounty on John's head, mobilizing his entire security apparatus. This draws in former associates and those eager to earn easy money. John finds himself temporarily captured when a highly capable assassin, Ms. Perkins, attempts to ambush him in his hotel room, another violation of the sacred ground of the Continental, where business is strictly forbidden. John survives this thanks to his sheer endurance and the assistance of the concierge Sharon, who maintains the hotel's strict code. The pursuit escalates. John systematically dismantles Vigo's network. We see flashbacks detailing the source of John's legend. His marriage to Helen was an explicit condition of his retirement, a promise he made after a string of nearly impossible missions that cemented his status as the one man who could always get the job done. The climax sees John cornering Iosef in a fortified compound. The confrontation is swift, and Iosef's end is suitably ignominious, fulfilling the initial purpose of John's rampage. However, Vigo remains. The final confrontation is less about vengeance and more about the inescapable nature of the world John tried to leave. Vigo attempts one last desperate move, leveraging a past favor, but John is past bargaining. The final fight is raw and personal. John finally defeats Vigo, making his point unequivocally. The rules he established for his retirement were absolute, and violating them comes at the highest possible cost. In the aftermath, John is wounded but free of his immediate obligation. He finds one final living companion, a pit bull puppy rescued from the wreckage of a dogfighting operation. A replacement perhaps for the lost Daisy, suggesting a tentative, fragile return to a life that might once again hold love, albeit one forever scarred by the violence he was forced to embrace. The emotional weight carried by John Wick at the film's opening is immense, a silent testament to the life he traded for love. Helen's final gift, the puppy, isn't just a pet. It's a tangible link to the future they planned, a future abruptly stolen by illness. This shared grief over Helen is the first unseen antagonist John battles. His former profession, steeped in a cold, calculated lethality, had left him with a specific skill set that made him an anomaly. A man who could love so fiercely, he would walk away from the darkness entirely. The theft of the Mustang and the murder of Daisy weren't just crimes against property or pets. They were a profound act of existential disrespect. For Viggo Tarasov, this miscalculation stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of John's current state. Viggo knew the Baba Yaga, the man capable of wiping out entire security details with calculated indifference, the man who operated under the strict, almost monastic code enforced by Winston and the Continental. But Viggo mistakenly believed the man he knew was truly gone, replaced by the quiet widower. He failed to grasp that the deep reservoir of John's discipline, honed over years of survival in a world where a moment's hesitation meant death, was merely dormant, not extinguished. When John begins his methodical retrieval of his hidden armory, the scene where he pries up the concrete floor, it's like watching a master craftsman unveil his specialized tools. There is no rage. There is only the terrifying focus of someone enacting a sworn duty. The way he moves, even in preparation, speaks volumes about his training. He doesn't waste motion. Every calculated step to secure ammunition or check the tension on a newly acquired rifle is imbued with the muscle memory of countless battles fought across continents for powerful men like Viggo. The sequence at the Red Circle nightclub is where the legend snaps back into sharp focus. The music pounds, the lights strobe, but John moves through the chaos as if encased in a vacuum of pure intent. He fights with an economical grace reminiscent of master martial artists, where every block transitions seamlessly into a disabling strike, and every bullet finds its intended vital mark. He doesn't just kill, he dismantles the operational capabilities of Viggo's organization piece by piece. It is a performance of lethal poetry driven by the purest form of motive, the defense of memory. The introduction of characters like Marcus, the aging, respected sharpshooter, adds layers to the underworld's structure. Marcus's hesitation speaks to the fraternity that binds these men, a shared history where loyalty is transactional, but respect is earned through survival. Conversely, figures like Ms. Perkins represent the new breed, hungry and reckless, willing to breach the sacred neutrality of the Continental for a quick payoff. Highlighting the pervasive corruption John is actively fighting against, even within his sanctuary. The Continental itself is crucial. It is the only recognized neutral ground, a place where rules are the only law stronger than any syndicate. The flashback showing John's commitment to Helen, the visible toll it took to retire, the immense favor he called in, the promise made to live a normal life, deepens the tragedy. His current rampage isn't a return to darkness for pleasure. It's a necessary, albeit devastating, act of self-defense against a world that refuses to let him go peacefully. When he finally confronts Viggo, the older crime lord's pleas reveal his pathetic underestimation of John's commitment to his wife's legacy. The final execution isn't a triumphant shout, but a somber closing of a terrible chapter, leaving John utterly exhausted, having paid the ultimate price for peace, the destruction of the very peace he sought. The act of taking the new dog, a seemingly battered and discarded creature, suggests a subtle shift. Perhaps the capacity for care, buried under layers of required brutality, can yet find a small outlet, offering a glimmer of hope against the overwhelming tide of his past life. The exhaustion etched onto John's face in the final moments is not merely physical fatigue. It is the spiritual toll of having to re-inhabit a skin he desperately tried to shed. He is the reluctant executioner, forced to prove his legendary status once more, not for power or profit, but for the sacred sanctity of a promise made to a dying woman. This internal conflict elevates the action far beyond a simple revenge narrative. It becomes a meditation on the impossibility of true escape from one's nature, especially when that nature is defined by ultimate competence in lethal arts. Viggo's character is fascinating in his desperate, sputtering arrogance. He is a man who built an empire on ruthlessness, yet he is paralyzed by the one force he cannot buy off, manipulate, or control: John Wick's grief-fueled resolve. Viggo's fear is rooted in memory. He remembers the John who was an almost supernatural operative, capable of feats that defied logic even within their violent profession. When Viggo attempts to appeal to past loyalties or offer exorbitant sums, he reveals his core delusion: that John's humanity was conditional, dependent only on his current happiness, rather than being a fundamental, enduring aspect of his identity that the violence only temporarily obscured. The dynamic with Winston, the impeccable manager of the Continental, provides a crucial anchor to the underworld's complex ethos. Winston acts as the custodian of the rules, displaying a detached professionalism that borders on reverence for order. His measured responses and subtle expressions of regret when John is forced to violate the hotel's sanctity, like the ambush by Perkins, underscore that John is both a celebrated prodigy and a profound liability to the system. Winston's decision to hold fire during the chaos surrounding John often suggests a quiet respect for John's unique position. He is too dangerous to cross, yet too legendary to simply discard. When John infiltrates Viggo's heavily guarded operations, the contrast between the casual brutality of the syndicate foot soldiers and John's precise, almost clinical application of force is stark. The choreography of his movements often seems influenced by practical close-quarters combat techniques honed by real-world tactical necessity, lending an authenticity to the action sequences that separates them from stylized fantasy. He uses leverage, balance, and environmental awareness, the hallmarks of a genuine professional, rather than relying on superhuman stamina alone, although his ability to absorb punishment speaks to an almost inhuman resilience. The rescue of the new dog, a pit bull puppy Viggo's men were likely using for fighting rings, serves as a poignant bookend. This puppy is not Daisy. It lacks the personal history and the scent of Helen's memory. It is an animal representative of the forgotten, the discarded victims of the world John inhabits. By saving it, John performs a final act of stewardship, reclaiming a tiny sliver of life from the destruction he had to unleash. It's a gesture that speaks volumes about his character's inherent capacity for empathy, a quiet commitment to protect the vulnerable, which is the very thing that drew him out of the darkness in the first place, and perhaps the only thing that can draw him back toward the light, however tentatively. He walks away, not victorious in the traditional sense, but having purged the immediate threat, leaving behind the wreckage of a life he hoped never to touch again. The silence that settles over John Wick after the final confrontation is heavy, far more oppressive than the noise of gunfire that preceded it. He stands amidst the remnants of Viggo's empire, the accumulated consequence of one terrible night pressing down on him. The immediate, searing need for vengeance has been met, but the deeper vacuum left by Helen remains, now exacerbated by the brutal effort required to protect her memory. He carries his wounds not as trophies, but as physical manifestations of the compromise he was forced to make. The necessity of destroying the fragile peace he had built. His slow walk away from the scene is deliberate, devoid of the swagger of a conqueror. This is the exit of a surgeon who has performed a necessary, life-saving amputation. The patient survives, but the procedure itself leaves permanent scars. He ignores the chaos of the underworld, scrambling to assess the power vacuum left by Viggo's demise. For John, those political machinations hold no interest. They are merely the background noise of the world he has reluctantly stepped back into, even temporarily. The focus narrows back to the small, breathing creature in his arms. The pit bull puppy, rescued from the grime of Viggo's operation, represents a clean slate, an unblemished slate, in stark contrast to the bloodied history John has just rehearsed. Where Daisy was the final gift of love from his wife, This new dog is a burden of responsibility he chooses to bear, an anchor to the world outside the kill zone. The dog's tentative trust, its unawareness of the recent carnage, offers a momentary respite from John's self-reproach. John's return to his hidden sanctuary, the concrete floor concealing his arsenal now empty, signifies a crossing of a threshold. He has used the tools of his past life to defend his present, and now he must deal with the fallout of having those tools so recently employed. The question hanging in the air is unspoken but profound. Can a man who has just proven himself the most lethal force in the city truly ever be satisfied with quiet domesticity again? The world knows he is back. The rules of engagement have been reset, not by his choice, but by the violation inflicted upon him. He has demonstrated that while he can retire, he cannot be erased. The legend Baba Yaga has been refreshed, his terrifying efficacy reaffirmed. Any future attempts to silence him or to violate the sanctity of his life will now be met not just with lethal force, but with the established precedent of absolute, uncompromising destruction. John Wick is now less a man seeking peace and more a living deterrent, forever poised on the edge of the abyss, holding tight to the small, fragile hope that this final violent act will purchase him the silence he deserves. The narrative lingers on the precariousness of John's current state, highlighting the inherent instability of his existence once the rules protecting his retirement have been so brutally tested. He is tethered to the Continental, not just by the rules of payment and sanctuary, but by the knowledge that men like Winston are watching, noting the extent of the damage and the public display of his lethal capabilities. Winston's cool observation, often implying a mixture of admiration and deep concern for the stability of their clandestine society, suggests that John's dramatic reemergence is a significant event on the underworld's ledger. He is a walking anomaly, a man who once achieved the impossible feat of stepping away, and who has now proven that returning is just as effortless. As John tends to his minor injuries, the physical reality of the cost sinks in. Every bruise and shallow cut is a stark reminder that even the Baba Yaga is not immune to consequence when fighting overwhelming odds, especially when those odds are backed by the resources of an organization like Vigo's. The quiet moments now are not peaceful. They are filled with the echoes of the fight, the phantom weight of the weapons he no longer holds. This lingering tension suggests that retirement is not a destination John can simply arrive at. It is a continuous, desperate state of denial he must constantly reinforce, a state now severely undermined by the events that transpired over that single, catastrophic evening. The puppy, resting near the empty gun safe, becomes the visual metaphor for this delicate balancing act. One paw in the quiet comfort of domesticity, the other forever planted in the hard-won, bloody soil of the assassin's world. The weight of the immediate aftermath settles into a gnawing awareness that the world, once momentarily stunned into deference, will inevitably adjust and seek to test him again. John Wick understands this calculus better than anyone. Reputation, once earned through violent acts, demands constant maintenance, lest it erode into mere anecdote. The quiet he seeks is the silence of being utterly forgotten, a luxury his spectacular reappearance has just made impossible. He is now a marked man, not by bounty, but by the sheer spectacle of his proficiency. His interaction with the rescued pit bull puppy becomes an exercise in forced gentleness, a deliberate counterpoint to the reflexive violence that dominated his recent actions. He must consciously suppress the muscle memory that wants to check corners, to assess threats in every shadow. The puppy's dependence forces a narrative shift in his internal dialogue, moving from targets and trajectories to feeding schedules and comfort. It is a fragile, almost desperate attempt to build a foundation of normalcy on ground that is still trembling from the shockwave of his rampage. The underworld, always quick to read the currents of power, will interpret John's actions in varying, dangerous ways. Some will see weakness in his initial grief, believing the sentimentality that drove him might be exploited again. Others will see overwhelming, irrational strength, recognizing that the man who fights for a stolen car and a dead dog fights with a conviction no mere contract could inspire. This dichotomy means that while Vigo's direct organization is neutralized, The ecosystem of assassins he briefly disturbed will now view him with a mixture of fear and professional curiosity. They will dissect his methods, trying to learn the edge that allowed him to cut through the Tarasov network so cleanly. Even within the sterile sanctity of the Continental, a subtle shift occurs. Winston, observing John's departure, understands that the line between active participant and honored guest has blurred dangerously. John has reaffirmed the hotel's core principle, that violent action cannot occur on its grounds, but he has done so while operating at the highest possible operational tempo, just outside its walls. This forces Winston and the adjudicators to consider John not just as an esteemed former colleague, but as a potential source of destabilization. He is too powerful to ignore, and too unpredictable to fully trust within the established order. John's journey away from the devastation is one of pure depletion. He is not contemplating his next move, he is simply enduring the return to baseline existence, attempting to recalibrate his senses away from high alert. The car, the prized Mustang, likely remains a casualty, another necessary sacrifice to the god of his former life. He walks toward an uncertain future, defined only by the weight of the puppy in his arms and the knowledge that the quiet he once enjoyed was a privilege earned through bloodshed, a privilege he has just violently, yet successfully, re-earned the right to attempt to reclaim. The silence now is pregnant with implication. The game has changed, and John Wick has just reminded everyone exactly why he was never meant to be trifled with. The road ahead for John Wick is paved with an unsettling ambiguity. He has successfully navigated the immediate crisis, silencing the threat posed by the Tarasov Syndicate. Yet the very act of doing so has broadcast his status across the entire clandestine network. He didn't just eliminate a problem. He reminded the world of a forgotten apex predator. The silence he craves is now actively being threatened by the very reputation he sought to bury alongside Helen. This newly re-established legend presents a unique psychological burden. For a man whose entire adult life was structured around obedience to contracts and adherence to lethal protocol, returning to the domestic sphere feels like trying to wear armor that no longer fits. He studies the rescued pit bull, perhaps sensing a parallel in the animal. Both are survivors pulled from a brutal context. Both require careful, nonviolent nurturing to trust again. This animal, nameless for now, becomes the physical embodiment of the fragile innocence John must protect. The reason he must try, again, to remain untainted by the blood clinging to his skin. The true fallout resides in the subtle communications that must follow. Winston, at the Continental, will be receiving calls, subtle inquiries regarding the disposition of Vigo and the extent of the collateral damage John inflicted. These conversations will determine whether John is granted a temporary reprieve or immediately targeted by those seeking to capitalize on Vigo's weakness or avenge past slights against the Syndicate. The underworld operates on respect and fear, and John has just dramatically tipped the scales on both. There is a chilling realization that even in his forced retirement, John Wick was never truly disconnected. He maintained the caches, he kept the knowledge, and somewhere deep within, the warrior remained ready. This realization suggests that the desire to leave was perhaps more about love for Helen than any inherent distaste for the violence itself. Now, with Helen gone, the primary tether to the normal world is severed, leaving the dark habits of his past profession as the only familiar landscape. As John moves through the city, perhaps retrieving necessities, or simply finding a quiet place to rest, his heightened senses work against him. Every vehicle slowing down, every individual meeting his gaze for too long, triggers the instant threat assessment protocols ingrained from his formative years under the patronage that forged him. He is a man whose nervous system is permanently tuned to a frequency others cannot perceive. The tranquility he seeks is no longer an absence of threats, but an absence of the world that creates them. And that absence, he is learning with painful clarity, is the one contract he may never be able to fulfill. The quiet peace of the grave is the only true retirement in his line of work, and he is clearly not ready for that final contract yet, preferring the arduous, painful struggle for a life he almost touched. The journey into the aftermath is characterized by a profound sense of inertia, battling against ingrained momentum. John Wick is physically moving, yet spiritually stalled. His immediate environment, the city that just witnessed his destructive reemergence, suddenly feels too small, too observed. He's acutely aware that every corner store clerk, every traffic cop, every seemingly ordinary passerby might be peripherally connected to the network he just decimated, making simple acts like buying dog food and exercise in vigilance. The puppy becomes his necessary anchor against spiraling into the darkness he just fought so hard to escape. He names the dog, perhaps quietly, perhaps only in his mind, a small act of reclaiming personal agency that is uncontaminated by violence. This animal demands forward motion. It must eat. It needs water. It requires care, forcing John to focus on the incremental progress of survival, rather than the catastrophic totality of his actions. This is a man who once moved across continents on orders. Now, his world is reduced to the span of a leechish and a small bowl. The memory of his initial retirement, the stark conditionality of his life with Helen, casts a long shadow. He fulfilled his end of the bargain, living a clean life until fate intervened. Now fate has cruelly rescinded the terms of his peace treaty. He's left holding the pieces, understanding that the structure of the underworld, built on debts, markers, and unwavering adherence to the code of the Continental, is the only structure that truly respects his capabilities. Love offered him a brief respite, but violence confirms his undeniable place in that insulated society. There is a deep-seated irony in how John Wick's actions play out across the criminal landscape. Vigo's organization was steeped in old-world organized crime, relying on hierarchy and intimidation. John, though a product of that world, operates with a terrifyingly modern efficiency. He bypasses the hierarchy. He doesn't negotiate with lieutenants. He goes directly to the root of the insult. This efficiency serves as a chilling lesson to other crime bosses. If you target John Wick, you bypass the entirety of your defenses, because he will simply destroy the path to you. He must now deal with the physical evidence of his past life, the empty safe, the missing weapons. These are holes in the narrative he tried to construct, visible signs that the Baba Yaga was briefly summoned. Disposing of the high-powered weaponry with the same meticulous care he used to retrieve, it is a grim chore, an attempt to scrub the slate clean. He is dismantling his own defense systems, hoping that by removing the tools, he can force the transformation back toward the man Helen knew. Yet, the closing image leaves the audience with the distinct understanding that this is not the end of his story, but perhaps just the end of his first intermission. He has proven that he can be pulled back, and once pulled back, the results are devastatingly final. John Wick, walking into the uncertain dawn with a small dog, is not a picture of redemption. It is a picture of a man clinging to the last vestiges of his humanity, knowing full well that the world he saved his life for is already plotting how to take it again, simply because he exists as such a powerful anomaly. The palpable tension clinging to John is that of a freshly healed wound reopened repeatedly. He is fundamentally a creature of habit, and his habits, honed over decades, are rooted in absolute lethality. Even the simple act of caring for the new dog requires a conscious overriding of primal instincts. When the puppy startles at a loud truck backfiring, John's body instantly tenses, his gaze snapping to the source of the noise with the readiness to neutralize a threat, before the small, soft weight in his hands pulls him back to the present reality of nurture. This constant internal battle between the Baba Yaga and the grieving husband is exhausting him more than any gunfight. The world he returns to is one of rigid formality masquerading as chaos. The rules of the Continental, no business on premises, markers honored without question, sanctuary guaranteed, are the bedrock of stability in a foundationless profession. John's respect for Winston is predicated on Winston's unwavering enforcement of these rules. However, John's recent actions, while not violating the sanctity of the hotel itself, have shown how easily the outside world can encroach upon that peace. He has become a living argument for the necessity of an even stricter code, or conversely, a case study in why the underworld must remain guarded against men capable of such singular, devastating focus. It is interesting to consider the career trajectories that brought these men to this point. Vigo was the established, transactional crime lord, utilizing brute force and political leverage. John Wick was the specialist, the ghost contracted for the impossible, operating with a surgical precision that made him invaluable but ultimately disposable to men like Vigo. Now, Vigo is gone, demonstrating that in this ecosystem, the specialist, when sufficiently motivated by personal stakes, always outmaneuvers the general. John's motivation wasn't a $1 million contract, it was a stolen car and a murdered companion, proving that the emotional calculus of a man like John Wick far outweighs any material incentive. As John drives away, perhaps finding the Mustang too conspicuous, perhaps realizing the car itself is too much of a symbol of the life he's trying to leave, he seeks anonymity. This pursuit of invisibility is ironic, given the trail of destruction he's left. He moves like a phantom, but his recent deeds are now headline news in the shadows. He's the ghost that everyone saw clearly. This forces him into a state of hypervigilance, an occupational hazard that Helen's love had briefly muted, but could never permanently erase. The presence of the new dog offers a counter-narrative to the violence. It's not a replacement for Daisy, an irreplaceable vessel of memory, but rather a commitment to the future Helen wished for him. A life that allowed for care, vulnerability, and non-lethal connection. If John Wick has learned anything from his tenure as the Baba Yaga, it is that survival demands adaptability. To survive this emotional aftermath, he must adapt to the quiet, to the mundane, finding strength not in the arsenal he just emptied, but in the tentative, warm weight settled in his lap. The film closes not on a victory fanfare, but on the weary sigh of a man who has fought desperately to earn the right to simply be quiet, knowing that the world he defeated will always be circling, waiting for him to slip again. The residue of the violence clings to John like a second skin, an invisible coating that no amount of careful cleaning or deliberate quiet can fully dissipate. He is trapped in a perpetual state of transition, forever poised between the stark reality of his past and the fragile illusion of a future Helen envisioned. The pit bull, now perhaps tentatively named or simply acknowledged as a companion, acts as a constant tactile reminder of the commitment he is attempting to honor, the commitment to empathy, to softness, to the world outside the shadows. His movements, even when directed towards simple sustenance for the dog, are laced with the economy of motion learned in training rooms where missteps meant execution. He navigates public spaces with an almost paranoid efficiency, his awareness of the environment so acute that it prevents him from ever truly relaxing. This hyper-awareness is the curse of the elite operative. The moment he ceases to be the hunter, he becomes the most obvious and tempting prey. The legend of the Baba Yaga has not faded. It has been polished to a brilliant, dangerous sheen. The underworld's reaction is already percolating. Lesser players, those who saw Vigo's failure as an opportunity, might soon make overtures, testing the boundaries of John's alleged retirement. They will not send direct threats initially, but rather probes, small violations, misplaced items, messages hinting at surveillance, designed to gauge if the legendary killer is truly gone or merely resting. These subtle challenges are perhaps more insidious than a frontal assault, forcing John to expend mental energy policing, a piece he never truly possessed. Winston and the administrators of the Continental, meanwhile, are surely engaged in damage control. John's actions, while perfectly executed within the parameters of not drawing weapons inside the hotel, have created a geopolitical tremor in their carefully balanced world. They rely on the belief that the legends, once retired, stay retired. John's violent return complicates their assurances to other powerful entities who rely on the Continental's promise of neutrality and order. Winston likely views John with a complicated mixture of professional pride in his efficacy and genuine exasperation at the disruption he causes to the established equilibrium. The emotional landscape for John is bleak because the victory is inherently hollow. He proved he could defend Helen's memory with absolute brutality, but in doing so, he proved that the cost of that memory was the destruction of the quiet life she bought for him. The puppy is a potential future, but the blood on his hands is the undeniable past. He has bought himself time, perhaps a few weeks or months of relative quiet, but he has also permanently raised the stakes. Any future transgression against him will not just bring the Baba Yaga, it will bring the Baba Yaga who has already proven he is willing to tear down an entire criminal structure for the smallest slight. John Wick is now more than just a legend. He is an unavoidable natural disaster, contained only by his own tenuous will to live gently. The weight of consequence settles upon John, not as an immediate threat, but as a slow, creeping frost, undermining the warmth of the small life he holds. He understands that the criminal element, much like a predator assessing a wounded rival, will initially retreat, but only to regroup and calculate. They witnessed a man operating beyond the normal calculus of reward and risk. They saw a force driven by something far more potent than currency. This devotion to a memory grants him a brief, dangerous untouchability, a period where even the most ambitious assassins hesitate before crossing a line marked by such profound, personal devastation. John's movements become less about evasion and more about establishing new boundaries. If he seeks anonymity, he must do so in places that are deliberately obscure, away from the well-trafficked arteries of the underworld that flow into and out of the Continental. He seeks the mundane, perhaps even temporary refuge in anonymity, a dingy motel room far from the opulent, ordered chaos of the city center. In such a place, the only currency is cash, the only rule is to keep quiet, a stark contrast to the complex marker-based economy of his former life. The presence of the pit bull, whose small, trusting eyes reflect an untainted innocence, forces John to confront the parts of himself that Helen managed to reach. He finds himself performing domestic acts with the same focused intensity he once applied to dismantling a security system. Cleaning the puppy's makeshift bedding, ensuring clean water. These small rituals are an intentional form of self-medication, a slow, deliberate inoculation against the reflex to violence. He is trying to rewire his entire being based on the quiet lessons taught in his brief period of peace. However, the professional specter of his past lingers. The weapons are gone, but the expertise remains etched in his sinews. He cannot unlearn the fight. Furthermore, those who might seek to settle old scores or challenge the new pecking order, those Vigo never fully controlled, will see John Wick's return as a necessary, violent reset button for the entire structure. They might not attack him directly, but they could begin targeting those tangentially associated with him, forcing him out of hiding through collateral damage, a strategy he knows intimately well. The film ends not on resolution, but on suspension. John Wick has earned his solitude by demonstrating the capacity for total war. He walks away with a fragile life depending on him, a life that necessitates the suppression of the monster within. This final image, the legendary killer cradling a puppy against the backdrop of a city he just shook to its foundations, is the ultimate statement on his character. He is a man perpetually caught between the darkness he mastered and the light he desperately craved, with only a small, breathing creature to tell him which direction to try walking next. The weight of this fragile truce with his past manifests in John's inability to truly rest. Sleep, when it comes, is a shallow, fractured affair, punctuated by the phantom sound of gunfire or the searing image of Helen's final moments. He wakes not with the sudden, sharp alertness of a professional surveying a threat, but with a heavy, confused disorientation, struggling to recall which reality is the immediate one. The quiet motel room offers no comfort. It feels temporary, a mere holding pattern before the inevitable turbulence resumes. His relationship with the puppy deepens into something symbiotic. John recognizes a shared trauma. Both were collateral damage in a larger, uncaring conflict. He speaks to the dog, his voice rusty from disuse, outside of necessary commands, using low, even tones that are a conscious effort to keep his own internal volume down. He might even assign the dog a name, something simple and untainted by his previous life. Perhaps Karen, darkly ironic for the ferryman of the dead, or something utterly innocuous like Boy, reflecting a fundamental need for simplicity. This pet is his confidant, the only entity to whom he can display vulnerability without fear of exploitation. The professional observers, Marcus, perhaps sending a discreet, untraceable message of respect through an encrypted channel, or even Winston's network of informants, are already charting the ripple effects of Vigo's fall. They note the unusual cleanliness of the operation. John didn't just kill Vigo, he surgically removed a limb of organized crime without causing the entire body to convulse immediately. This suggests a mastery that commands a higher level of respect, and consequently, a higher level of caution from potential enemies. He is now more of a strategic anomaly than a mere target. John's movements become obsessively ritualistic, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. He cleans his few remaining possessions, checks the locks on the motel door multiple times, not because he fears a direct assault yet, but because the lack of structure is what frightens him most. He is searching for the familiar rhythm of preparation, but without the concrete objective of a contract, the actions become hollow, almost manic. He is mourning the structure of his old life as much as he is mourning Helen, because that structure, at least, was predictable. The narrative arc pivots toward the agonizing realization that the peace he fought for was conditional on his complete withdrawal, a withdrawal the criminal world refused to grant him. He has proven that he cannot simply put down the gun and become a civilian. His existence is intrinsically linked to the darkness. The final lingering emotion is not triumph, but profound, weary disappointment. He successfully defended the memory of his love, but in doing so, he has shattered the possibility of inheriting the future that love represented. John Wick is left walking toward an unknown horizon, armed only with specialized skills he prays he won't have to use, perpetually haunted by the knowledge that true retirement for a man like him might only ever be achieved by relinquishing the very life he fought so brutally to save. The stark, almost minimalist elegance of the initial sequences in John Wick immediately establishes a tone far removed from the cluttered, exposition-heavy action films preceding it. We are introduced not merely to a retired assassin, but to a ghost wrestling with the remnants of a human life forcefully resurrected by tragedy. Keanu Reeves's portrayal, steeped in a quiet, almost monastic grief following the loss of his wife Helen, is crucial. This performance is physically subdued, yet emotionally volcanic, grounding the subsequent explosion of violence in palpable bereavement. Helen, though absent for most of the film, serves as the narrative and emotional anchor. Her parting gift, the beagle puppy Daisy, is not just a pet, but the final tether to a legitimate, soft existence. The transition from grieving widower to unstoppable force is catalyzed by the calculated brutality of Iosef Tarasov. His casual destruction of the puppy and theft of the car are the ultimate violations, striking not at John's profession, but at his very fragile humanity. This transgression immediately activates the legend, Baba Yaga, the boogeyman. The film masterfully utilizes the audience's prior knowledge, or quick assimilation, of Wick's reputation. We understand instantly that the consequence for this act will not be mere punishment, but obliteration. The world-building that follows is perhaps the film's most enduring innovation. The Continental Hotel, established as a sanctuary governed by an ironclad code of neutrality, reveals a hidden, highly structured society operating parallel to the mundane world. Ian McShane's Winston is the perfect figurehead for this system, a proprietor whose politeness masks absolute chilling authority. This society has its own economy, symbolized by the gold coins, and its own liturgy of violence, reinforced by the pervasive, almost liturgical use of firearms and specialized tactical gear sourced through obscure, reliable contacts. This meticulous attention to operational detail lends a verisimilitude rarely seen in stylized action cinema. Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, both veterans of stunt coordination, Stahelski having famously doubled for Reeves in the Matrix trilogy, bring a deep, intuitive understanding of movement and impact to the direction. The fight choreography eschews the frantic, shaky cam approach that plagued earlier 21st century action. Instead, we see clear, deliberate sequences emphasizing precision, economy of motion, and the practical application of mixed martial arts integrated seamlessly with gunplay, a style often dubbed gun fu. Wick's fighting is never flashy. It is brutally efficient, reflecting his professional focus. He doesn't fight, he eradicates. The recurring motif of Wick's mastery over his environment and his tools is evident in every confrontation. The scene in the Red Circle nightclub, where he systematically clears rooms, is a showcase of spatial awareness and tactical discipline. Even when facing overwhelming odds, Wick's movements are dictated by training, not improvisation. This discipline echoes the intense physical rigor required of top-tier action performers, Reeves himself having dedicated years to mastering weapons handling and various martial disciplines for this role, and previous ones, most notably the Wing Chun and various forms of Kung Fu seen in The Matrix. The introduction of Viggo Tarasov, played with magnificent, oily menace by Michael Nyqvist, provides the necessary counterbalance. Viggo understands John Wick better than anyone, recognizing the sheer impossibility of containing a man driven by grief and professional pride. His attempts to send increasingly skilled teams, from the initial street thugs to professional cleaners like Marcus, played by Willem Dafoe, only serve to further illustrate the escalating depth of Wick's legend. Marcus, a retired colleague and friend, represents the lingering bonds within this fractured world, providing subtle aid rooted in respect rather than obligation. Ultimately, John Wick is a modern myth about consequence. It is a film about the absolute failure of retirement when the past is violently summoned. The film strips away sentimentality, leaving only the primal drive for retribution. By the climax, the violence has purged the immediate antagonists, but the peace achieved is fleeting and conditional. The final shot, showing John retrieving the puppy, now alive and representing a possibility of future connection, confirms that the action was not merely for survival, but for the right to continue grieving privately. The film's success lies in making the audience invest completely in the elegant, terrifying logic of this hyper-violent yet deeply principled underworld. The film's deliberate pacing in the opening act ensures that when the inevitable explosion of violence occurs, it feels less like an arbitrary shift into action and more like a dam breaking under unbearable pressure. Reeves' physical commitment to the role is evident in the subtle exhaustion that clings to John even at his most lethal. He is not energized by the killing. He is performing a necessary, painful function. This contrasts sharply with the younger, entitled arrogance of Iosef, who views violence as a sport and property, as something easily taken. Iosef's fatal flaw is his inability to grasp the difference between a man who kills for a living and a man who kills because he has nothing left to lose, the latter being infinitely more dangerous. Winston's role as the gatekeeper of the Continental reinforces the film's thematic exploration of order versus chaos. The sanctity of the hotel is the ultimate expression of this underworld's internal logic. It is a place where contracts are paused, where business is conducted with chilling formality, and where the gold coins serve as tangible proof of allegiance and worth within that system. The visual language surrounding the hotel, its opulent interiors contrasting with the harsh, neon-lit urban landscape outside, suggests a luxurious prison where rules are the only thing preventing total anarchy. The direction by Stahelski and Leitch transforms simple combat encounters into kinetic poetry. Consider the famous scene in the church armory. John doesn't simply fight his way through. He methodically selects his weapons, demonstrating an almost liturgical reverence for the right tool for the job. This sequence is a masterclass in tactical escalation, where every shot fired is accounted for, reflecting a professional discipline cultivated over decades. It's a direct payoff for the years Reeves and the directors spent in the trenches of action filmmaking, understanding that impact comes from clarity, not chaos. The famous gun fu isn't just style, it's the manifestation of John Wick's worldview. Every action must have a decisive, final purpose. Viggo Tarasov's fear of John is the film's most compelling secondary character arc. Viggo, steeped in the history and mythology of this underworld, knows precisely what he is unleashing by targeting John's car and the dog. His desperate attempts to negotiate, even offering John a chance to walk away after killing Iosef, highlight the deep respect and terror that Wick commands. Vigo represents the established power structure, attempting to contain an elemental force. His attempts to leverage Marcus showcase the emotional complexity embedded in this professional sphere. Even friendships are transactional, yet Marcus's refusal to fully comply speaks to an unwritten code of honor that supersedes even Vigo's direct orders. The film's emotional core remains Daisy. The puppy is the physical embodiment of Helen's memory, and when it is killed, it is the symbolic execution of John's brief return to normalcy. His subsequent rampage is, paradoxically, an act of loyalty to his dead wife. He cannot mourn freely in the mundane world. He must carve out a space for his grief through righteous, devastating violence within the only language he truly masters. The resolution, where he retrieves the surviving puppy from Marcus's care, is not a happy ending, but a hard-won conditional truce with reality. He has cleared the slate, paid the necessary price, and earned the right to try, once more, to exist in the quiet space Helen left behind. Armed now with the terrible knowledge that the past is always waiting just outside the door. The texture of the violence in John Wick is specifically designed to feel heavy, each impact registering not as a flashy cinematic flourish, but as a costly expenditure of energy. This physicality grounds Reeves's performance. He is always slightly pained, breathing hard, suggesting the effort required to push his body past its limits, even when facing adversaries who are ostensibly his equals or inferiors. The precision of the close-quarters combat, where Wick often transitions seamlessly from striking with the butt of a weapon to utilizing environmental elements, a pencil in one later installment, but here, perhaps a discarded piece of rebar or a door frame, speaks to an almost surgical application of force honed by decades of ruthless specialization. This isn't the kinetic ballet of a superhero. It is the methodical dismantling of targets by a highly trained, emotionally compromised operative. The design of the ancillary characters further enriches the mythology. Mrs. Perkins, played with cold professional ambition, embodies the opportunistic danger lurking even within the supposedly neutral zones. Her betrayal inside the Continental, attempting to execute John on sacred ground, underscores the fundamental tension of this world. Absolute rules are only as strong as the greed and desperation of the individuals operating under them. Her swift, non-negotiable consequence administered by Karen, the unflappable concierge, demonstrates that the Continental's code, while often tested, possesses lethal enforcement mechanisms that uphold the entire structure. Karen himself is a masterpiece of subtle world-building. Lance Reddick imbues him with an aristocratic stillness, serving as the perfect mirror to Winston's worldly authority. He is the keeper of the sanctuary's quiet dignity, ensuring that the rituals, the specialized care of weapons, the meticulous preparation of rooms are observed. His brief but impactful participation in the final defense of the Continental solidifies the idea that loyalty in this sphere is often less about friendship and more about adherence to a high, albeit violent, standard of professionalism. Vigo's final confrontation with John is emotionally resonant precisely because of the groundwork laid earlier. When Vigo is finally cornered, his pleas are less about self-preservation and more about a profound professional resignation. He recognizes that he has waged war against an inevitability. His history with John, implied to involve operations that tested John's limits even before Helen's death, suggests a shared dark lineage. The act of killing Vigo is less a passionate outburst for John and more a final clerical duty. The score has been settled, the necessary loose ends tied up before he can attempt to salvage the emotional aftermath represented by the surviving puppy. John Wick is not a story about finding peace. It is about achieving the necessary, violent clearance to earn the right to seek a moment's respite from the noise. The film suggests that for men like John, true retirement is impossible. Only temporary surcease, bought at an unimaginable price, is attainable. The film's triumphant success paved the way for the expansion of this meticulously crafted underworld, compelling a sequel that faced the Sisyphean task of raising the stakes without undermining the foundational purity of the first narrative's revenge arc. Chapter 2 had to address the consequences of John's actions in New York, particularly the breach of Continental protocol by killing a patron on hotel grounds. however justified he felt his actions were in response to Iosef. This shift moves the focus from personal tragedy to systemic obligation. John Wick is no longer just a reactive force of grief. He becomes a fugitive bound by ancient, unbreakable oaths within the High Table, the unseen governing body that supersedes even the local authority of Winston. The introduction of the Elder and the global reach of the High Table architecture immediately internationalizes the conflict. The rules become more esoteric and encompassing, symbolized by the marker system, a debt that, once called in, demands absolute compliance, irrespective of personal desire or prior commitments. This forces John back into the world he desperately sought to exit, not for vengeance, but for survival contingent upon servitude. The elegance of the first film's confined geographic setting gives way to the sprawling, ancient, and bureaucratic horror of a global criminal infrastructure that values contracts above all human emotion. Keanu Reeves continues to embody the weary professionalism, but now there is a pronounced layer of spiritual exhaustion. He is less the grieving widower and more the Atlas carrying the weight of an entire terrifying societal structure on his shoulders. His interactions with the Bowery King, played by Lawrence Fishburne, offer a fascinating counterpoint to Winston. Where Winston manages established, civilized order within defined borders, the King thrives in the chaotic periphery, representing the untapped underground leverage available to those operating outside the immediate purview of the table's direct enforcement. Fishburne's verbose, almost Shakespearean delivery infuses the scenes with a sense of hidden history and underlying menace that perfectly complements Reeves's silent intensity. The action sequences escalate in complexity, moving from intimate, close-quarters engagements to large-scale skirmishes across iconic historical backdrops, such as the museum and the catacombs. The choreography becomes even more densely layered, integrating environmental storytelling directly into the fight mechanics. The sequence in the glass room becomes a stunning visual metaphor. Every block, every shot, every movement is visible, leaving no room for illusion, mirroring the absolute transparency required when defying the High Table. The enemies are no longer common thugs, but highly specialized operatives, often clad in armored gear, requiring John to employ increasingly desperate and creative applications of his gun fu, emphasizing kinetic problem-solving under extreme duress. The film solidifies the theme that for John Wick, the pursuit of peace is merely the prelude to the next mandatory battle for his soul, which is perpetually trapped within the gilded cage of his own lethal expertise. The exploration of obligation versus autonomy deepens considerably in the subsequent installment, forcing John into a perpetual state of being the highly skilled but unwilling pawn of a cosmic system. The High Table is revealed not as a set of optional rules, but as the inescapable architecture of their reality, a concept far more suffocating than the simple threat of organized crime encountered in the first film. This systemic pressure is visually represented by the omnipresent, faceless adjudicator, whose presence signals inescapable judgment. She operates with chilling impartiality, her demeanor utterly devoid of the personal malice that characterized Viggo Tarasov. She is bureaucracy made lethal. Her task is to impose order by punishing those who enabled John's temporary escape, thereby reinforcing the idea that sanctuary is always conditional. The introduction of Zero, played by Mark Dacascos, offers a fascinating mirror to John's professional intensity, though filtered through a lens of fandom rather than pure dedication. Zero admires John, studying his techniques with an almost academic reverence, which provides a necessary tonal break from the raw hostility of previous antagonists. He represents the next generation of assassins who see John not just as a target, but as a legend whose methodologies must be mastered. This dynamic allows for moments of darkly humorous interaction, a fleeting acknowledgement of shared professional mastery amidst the deadly ballet, before the inevitable clash. Yet, even Zero's enthusiasm cannot mask the grim reality. In this world, admiration is not a shield, it is merely another angle from which to be attacked. The set pieces become increasingly surreal, emphasizing the scope of the forces arrayed against one living legend. The horse stable fight sequence, for instance, merges the tactile brutality of early combat with a grander scale, using animals and tight, confined spaces to ratchet up the physical stakes. Furthermore, the necessity of repaying the marker to return to the Continental forces John to confront the agonizing realization that even small acts of loyalty, like Winston offering protection, come with colossal liabilities. When Winston is forced to shoot John off the roof, this act is portrayed not as betrayal, but as a necessary, high-stakes performance designed to placate the adjudicator and preserve the remnants of his own authority. John falls not merely physically, but into a deeper, more chaotic phase of his enforced existence. This continuous descent into systemic servitude highlights the essential tragedy of John Wick. He possesses the ultimate set of skills for survival in a hyper-violent ecosystem, but those very skills prevent him from ever achieving the quiet peace he seeks. Every victory simply redraws the map of his enslavement. The relationship between John and Sophia, played by Halle Berry, further complicates the narrative by introducing the concept of shared past debts across geographical and professional lines. Her unwavering commitment to protecting her dogs, an echo of John's own initial catalyst, grounds the escalating fantasy elements in recognizable fierce possessiveness over what little innocence remains in their lives. Their synchronized combat sequences showcase a refined cooperative lethality, demonstrating that even alliances are forged in the crucible of shared existential threat rather than emotional affinity. The world of John Wick, having expanded globally, has become not just more dangerous, but more tragically inescapable. The narrative thrust of the third installment pivots entirely on the concept of excommunication and the ensuing global manhunt, effectively transforming John from a sought-after operative into the single most valuable quarry on the planet. The initial premise of the film, a 72-hour grace period, establishes an immediate, unrelenting tempo that rarely lets up, mirroring John's own state of perpetual flight. His initial desperate run through the rain-slicked streets of New York is an exercise in pure, exhausted proficiency, relying on every favor, every old contact, and every scrap of muscle memory honed over decades. He is literally running on fumes and reputation, knowing every door, no matter how seemingly benign, leads either to momentary respite or violent opposition. The pilgrimage to the Elder in the desert represents a profound shift in John's spiritual landscape. Having exhausted every localized resource and every professional courtesy, he must appeal to the highest, most abstract source of power within the high table structure. The choice offered by the Elder, death or eternal servitude marked by the removal of his wedding ring, is devastatingly symbolic. To submit means erasing the last tangible marker of his human life with Helen, confirming that his identity as Baba Yaga has entirely consumed the man named John. Reeves portrays this scene with a stark, quiet acceptance. The fight has gone out of him, replaced by a grim, necessary compliance to survive long enough to perhaps one day earn true release. This act of self-mutilation seals his fate as the ultimate tragic hero of this cinematic universe. Sophia, as introduced through her unbreakable marker, brings a vital element of agency derived from maternal protection. Halle Berry's performance conveys a coiled tension, a woman who has meticulously walled herself off from the past, only to have John's unavoidable presence threaten the security she built for her children. The sequence in Casablanca, culminating in the brutal fight through the Continental's courtyard, is a masterwork of paired combat coordination. Sophia and John move not as friends necessarily, but as two highly disciplined military units executing a mutually beneficial, though extremely costly, tactical objective. The unleashing of her specialized guard dogs, trained for specific combat functions, adds another layer to the specialized nature of violence within this world. Even pets are instruments of war, and harming them guarantees the most visceral retaliation. The return to the New York Continental, under the direct authority of the adjudicator and the high table, forces Winston into a corner of impossible negotiation. Winston's character arc transforms from the detached proprietor to a desperate politician fighting for the sovereignty of his domain. His seemingly loyal defense of John against the high table's enforcers, culminating in the staged shooting, is the ultimate expression of his survival instinct and his sophisticated understanding of the system's self-correcting mechanisms. By offering John as a sacrifice, Winston momentarily satisfies the table's need for punishment, while ensuring John survives as a necessary deterrent against future overreach. John's fall from the roof is ambiguous. He survives, yes, but he is cast out, now an enemy of the entire codified structure he once tacitly respected. He is finally free of obligation, only because he has become the ultimate transgressor, standing outside the very rules that once defined him. This sets the stage for the fourth installment, where the conflict is no longer about personal score settling, but open war against the foundation of his fabricated reality. The fourth entry in the saga dramatically escalates the scope of John Wick's war, moving the conflict from personal revenge and systemic obligation to a direct confrontation with the entrenched, almost divine authority of the High Table itself. Having been declared excommunicado and cast down from the relative safety of established underworld structures, John operates in a state of pure kinetic desperation, a singular force pitted against a seemingly infinite bureaucracy of specialized executioners. The film dedicates significant time to visualizing the sheer scale of the table's reach, presenting agents, assassins, and enforcers drawn from every corner of the globe, each possessing unique skill sets and leveraging their respective territories for maximum lethality against the fugitive. The introduction of the Marquis Vincent Bisset de Gramont embodies the aristocracy and cold, detached cruelty of the High Table's upper echelon. He is not a fighter in the physical sense, like Vigo or Zero. His power is derived from his title and his capacity to systematically dismantle the lives and livelihoods of anyone who has ever afforded John Wick aid or comfort. The Marquis takes pleasure in destroying the very infrastructure that allowed John a semblance of order, liquidating Winston's assets, dismantling the Continental as a sanctuary, and enforcing accountability through public humiliation and execution. This villain understands that to truly kill John Wick, one must first erase everything that makes him human or professionally viable. The film excels in showcasing John's strategic brilliance when forced into an asymmetrical war. No longer relying on old markers or favors, John must actively seek new allies whose own grievances align with his fight against the Marquis' tyranny. This leads to crucial partnerships, most notably with the Bowery King, whose own similar punishment under the Adjudicator makes their alliance one of mutual scorched earth necessity. Furthermore, the rediscovery of his familial heritage and the necessary ritual of challenging the Marquis to a formal duel becomes the film's structural core. This duel, steeped in ancient codes and requiring John to seek acknowledgement from the Elder, reveals that even in this hyper-modern, bullet-riddled world, the oldest, most formal rules still hold ultimate sway, providing John a slim, almost theological avenue for resolution. The action sequences reach a breathtaking zenith of stylized carnage, pushing the boundaries of practical effects and choreography even further. The sustained overhead Osaka Continental sequence, for instance, showcases a fluid, almost balletic choreography where spatial awareness and environmental manipulation become paramount, demanding that the audience track multiple simultaneous threats with clarity. More significantly, the sustained effort required to survive these encounters emphasizes the physical toll. Reeves plays John in this installment as visibly battered, moving with the grim determination of a man who knows every fight could be his last, yet commits to each confrontation with utter finality. The final duel, fought on seemingly equal footing, yet burdened by the weight of John's past transgressions, is less about flashy technique and more about the sheer, bloody willpower to enforce a boundary. Winning the duel is not about reclaiming peace. It is about achieving the ultimate, final cessation of interference, buying himself, at long last, the right to truly rest outside the rules that governed his entire adult life. The thematic resolution achieved in the final moments of the fourth chapter suggests a deliberate pivot away from the cycle of service and retribution that has defined John Wick's existence. By successfully enacting the formal duel, John Wick is not simply pardoned. He effectively severs his contract with the established mythology that has both sustained and imprisoned him. The death of the Marquis signifies the collapse of the visible bureaucratic oppression, allowing for the possibility of a future defined by personal choice rather than enforced obligation. Reeves's performance in these final acts is marked by a profound sense of depletion. The adrenaline-fueled focus of the earlier films gives way to a somber exhaustion, as if the very act of winning has cost him the last vestiges of his fighting spirit. The subtle interplay between Winston and the Bowery King following the duel underscores the political maneuvering that underpins the supposed rigid structure of the underworld. They are survivors, pragmatic operators who understand that authority is fluid and must be managed, even if it means tacitly supporting a rebellion that restores a perceived balance. Their shared understanding with John implies a quiet respect for his ability to break the system entirely, something neither Winston nor the King, bound by their own roles, could ever truly risk. They are the necessary facilitators, ensuring that when the dust settles, a functional, albeit altered ecosystem remains for them to govern. The significance of the final moments, showing John finally entering a quiet, sunlit space, an echo of the life he lost, is potent precisely because it is earned through unprecedented violence. He has killed his way out of every contract, every debt, and every symbolic tether to his former life, including the ultimate shedding of his membership through ritual combat. This silence, following an endless barrage of noise and conflict, is not just peace, it is vacancy. It suggests that the only way for John Wick, the ghost, to finally find repose is to eradicate the very context that created him. The journey concludes not with a warm embrace or a return to Helen's memory in a conventional sense, but with the quiet acceptance of solitude, achieved only after satisfying the relentless demands of the shadow world he once briefly tried to leave behind. The film leaves the audience with the understanding that for John Wick, the only true retirement is one purchased with the absolute finality of his own breaking point. The true power of the John Wick saga lies in its unwavering commitment to the internal logic of its meticulously crafted mythology, where every ounce of violence is accounted for, and every rule, no matter how obscure, carries existential weight. The cumulative effect of the sequels is the transformation of John from an individual seeking vengeance into a singular phenomenon against the entire operating system of the criminal world. This narrative device ingeniously frames John's career not as a series of isolated jobs, but as a continuous penance, or perhaps a prolonged refusal to fully accept the terms of his retirement. Reeves's enduring physical commitment ensures that this escalating strain is visually translated. The slight hesitations in his footwork, the grimace hidden beneath his breath in close-ups. These details tell the audience that every successful encounter is a massive overdraft on his personal reserves. The world-building, consistently executed by the creative teams who understand practical spatial dynamics, relies heavily on the contrast between the extreme formality of the underworld and the sheer brutality of its outcomes. The Continental hotels are not just safe houses, they are temples of codified professionalism, where etiquette, down to the manner in which one orders a drink or pays a debt, is paramount. This formality serves to heighten the shock when that formality is inevitably shattered. When John operates outside the established parameters, using a horse as a weapon, driving recklessly through pedestrian zones, or engaging in sustained gunfights in crowded public areas, he is not just breaking local laws. He is demonstrating contempt for the entire governing philosophy that keeps the chaos manageable. The recurring motif of loyalty and debt reveals the thin, brittle nature of relationships in this sphere. Winston, despite his eventual betrayal and subsequent political alignment with the Bowery King, always operates from a position of self-preservation, viewing John as a priceless asset whose removal or temporary sacrifice maintains his own precarious balance of power. He is the ultimate cynic, understanding that reverence for a legend does not translate into unconditional support when the survival of his entire institution is at stake. This cynicism is precisely what John must overcome. He cannot rely on favors anymore, leading to the necessity of the duel, which strips away the reliance on intermediaries and forces a direct engagement with the system's creator. The enduring emotional resonance of the series, surprisingly, hinges on the objects and symbols of John's lost life. Helen's memory is the engine, but the various dogs serve as volatile emotional tripwires. They are the tangible representations of the warmth John forfeited. By the end of the established narrative, John's victory feels less like triumph and more like a desperate, violent clearing of the debris so that perhaps a sliver of quiet might exist. The final image, if one accepts the implied resolution, is one of utter finality. The end of the Baba Yaga. Not through capture or compromise, but through a deliberate, self-imposed erasure of his place within the system that defined him. It is a powerful conclusion for a modern action hero. His heroism is defined by his ultimate, successful refusal to continue performing the role he was forced into. The recurring structural device employed throughout the franchise, the invocation of ancient, nearly forgotten rules to resolve contemporary, high-stakes conflicts, is essential to the thematic richness of the John Wick universe. It suggests that beneath the veneer of modern technology, global logistics, and stylized weaponry, the assassin world is governed by a feudal, almost archaic sense of honor and binding oaths. This is most powerfully illustrated by the necessity of the duel in the final act. It elevates the conflict beyond a simple power struggle against the Marquis. It becomes a metaphysical negotiation with the very spirit of the organization. The requirement for John to be acknowledged by the Elder, the supreme authority residing outside the visible continental hierarchy, frames John's journey as a quest to find the one loophole that transcends the bureaucracy the Adjudicator and the Marquis represent. Reeves's subtle evolution as a performer mirrors John's deepening commitment to this brutal necessity. In the early films, his movements were reactive, fueled by immediate rage and defense. By the later installments, his actions possess a chilling economy, a lack of wasted energy that suggests complete internalization of the violence as his only language. When he fights, it is the execution of a necessary function, devoid of the earlier raw emotionality. This detachment is his armor, yet it is also his curse. The man who could mourn a dog is now capable of executing a ritualistic killing with the same weary precision. The world demands that he be the Baba Yaga, and he finally, tragically, complies completely to secure his freedom from that identity. The supporting cast members, particularly Winston and the Bowery King, function as crucial political mirrors, reflecting John's position in the ecosystem. Winston represents the established order, always playing a long game of institutional survival, willing to sacrifice John to maintain the fragile neutrality of the Continental. The Bowery King, conversely, embodies the rebellious undercurrent, the resentment of those marginalized by the High Table's rigid control. Their shared, albeit temporary, alliance with John after their respective punishments solidifies the narrative point. John Wick is not just a threat to the system, he is the catalyst that forces all other power players to publicly reevaluate their loyalties and positions in the shadow of the High Table's punitive reach. They fight to restore balance, while John fights for absence. The difference between their motivations fuels the sustained tension even in cooperative sequences. Ultimately, the entire saga functions as a sophisticated meditation on the impossibility of true escape from one's past, especially when that past involves unparalleled professional skill. John Wick is a cautionary tale about legacy. The reputation he built over decades becomes a cage that his wife's memory briefly tried to unlock. The filmic realization of this mythology, with its breathtakingly clear action and its insistence on adherence to esoteric codes, provides a framework where every bullet and every courtesy has established meaning. The quiet ending is thus earned, not as a reward, but as the inevitable byproduct of having utterly exhausted every possible avenue of engagement with the world he sought to leave. He doesn't win peace, he simply renders himself irrelevant to the rules that once dictated his every move. The lingering impact of the John Wick franchise is rooted in its successful creation of a self-contained narrative universe, where the laws of physics and societal norms are superseded